Hi, and welcome to the Storyfest 2022.
The different constraints that you're working with for telling a story through games. And I guess there's like some constraints and some additional benefits. So on the one hand, the constraints might be, you know, I need to localize this into so many different languages. And so I can't use puns, or if I use puns, I have to put alternative text. And puns are really important in games writing, you may know. So a lot of the time it's either that they just don't localize very well, or they end up having like alternative text to be translated. And that's what we do a lot in our game. We'll write puns in the English version, and then in the translated version, we'll have like a different line that makes more sense. Or sometimes like an alternative joke we can make that isn't like a sort of language-based joke. And that's mostly just because our other writer really loves puns, and I can't blame her. And then there's other sort of constraints that I hadn't really thought about or really realized. And one of them is, I guess this would apply for all types of literature, but for instance, with we have a non-binary character in the game, and using they, them pronouns is really hard in languages that have a feminine and a masculine version of their words. So I think, for instance, in German, one of the ways to do it is to have the feminine and masculine version of the word said together. And so when you're worrying about constraints like the amount of characters, as in word characters, you have on the screen, it suddenly becomes like this sort of technical problem. And it's like, well, this is a thing we've decided we want to do on a storytelling level, on an ethical level. It'd be really wrong to make this character not be who they are in a localized version. But how do we do this? So there's all kinds of like problems that you have to solve in this like cross-disciplinary way that becomes quite interesting and quite challenging. And I think like you have the flip side of that. Like, you know, you have things like the word constraints where you can't have that much text on screen because players don't like that, or, you know, you can't play the game whilst the screen is sort of really obscured with text. But on the flip side, you have visuals, which books, you know, usually, unless they're like a picture book or an illustrated book, they're not going to have the visuals or the interactivity in the story. And so it opens a lot of other avenues as well. There's so many interesting things that we can do with story structure when we add interactivity into the mix, and non-linear stories that I think books can only sort of scratch the surface of. They can do some stuff, but not as much as games can, and not as much as even you know, digital media in like TV or digital books can do. Like there's just so many more avenues of opportunity there. And also tabletop role-playing games allow you to do really interesting forms of interactive storytelling. So there's just so much stuff, and a lot of it we haven't even really discovered yet. So it's a really exciting part of a really exciting form of media, I guess, to write in.
So would you like to maybe elaborate more on how writing for games differs, in your opinion, from writing in different mediums and forms?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, in terms of like the practical side of things and the way I write differently, when I'm writing for games, 9 times out of 10, I'm writing in a spreadsheet. So that's really different. That's not kind of what you would do if you were writing for a book, or, you know, if you're writing a screenplay, you would do that differently. With Love and Pies, we do use screenplay formatting a lot of the time because it's just the nature of the game we have allows us to do that. But if I'm writing for like the UI or something, which isn't the most exciting writer's job, but it is one of the ones you end up doing on a game. So if I'm writing something for the interface, like, you know, click here to learn more, then that will be in like an Excel spreadsheet usually. And when I've done other types of writing, like character box and things like that, they will be in an Excel spreadsheet. I guess also for anyone who doesn't know, character arcs are the sort of one-liner things that characters can say that might get repeated, like, you know, I used to be an adventurer like you, and then I took an arrow to the knee, that kind of thing. Where there are these kind of ambient, repeatable lines that will get thrown up in the game sometimes. And a lot of times there's just like really filler stuff. But sometimes you'll get really interesting, fun ones where it's like, I don't know, becomes a meme, like in Skyrim. So that's like one of the different things, is that you have different styles of writing in games, and different types of requirements that you're going to have to think about. Like you might have to write a codex, and that's not something you'd have to do usually in typical sort of creative writing or traditional creative writing. And a codex is kind of like a fantasy Wikipedia page, it can be, or something like that. Usually a bit more condensed. You might have to do a lot more world building, where because the player can travel through the game instead of just sitting down and reading this linear story, you know, there might be a huge amount of stuff that the player could interact with, but they don't always interact with. So there's all kinds of things in terms of like how many words you might actually write. You know, there could be, I'm going to have to work on a project and I write 100,000 words, and the player is only likely to see 10,000 of them on any given playthrough. Or there could be a project where it's like, I'm only going to have to write 500 words and the player's going to see all of this. So it's really variable. It really depends on the project. And I think that almost universally, the writer or the narrative designer has to learn a lot about how to sort of work for that project, because we're still kind of making up the rules as we go along. Which is actually really fun though, if you like that kind of problem solving. You know, it allows for a lot of experimentation and a lot of new stuff to be done.
So what sort of things did you pick up along the way? What sort of tips would you have? Would you have people trying to get into that kind of job?
So I think like for tips and stuff like that, one of my main ones is to talk to people. I know it sucks if you're shy and you don't want to talk to people, but it really is useful to go and introduce yourself. And you know, if you're at an event and there's someone there who's made or worked on a game that you really love, it doesn't hurt to go and sort of say, hi, I really love this game, and tell them what you liked about it, because it could be something useful down the line to sort of have met that person. I think as well, putting yourself in the running for opportunities, even if you don't think you have a chance, like it doesn't hurt to sort of throw your hat in the ring. It's better for the person that you're applying to or sort of petitioning to be the one to say, nah, you can't do this, than for you to say it. Like, and when you do write cover letters, or when you do ask for something, don't give someone a reason to say no in the way you do it, because this is something I used to do all the time as quite an uncertain person. I used to be like, oh, you might not want me to do this because of this, this, and this. But actually, if I don't write those things down, they have to think of that on their own and put the work into to write that response telling me no. And sometimes it's easier to say yes. So I think letting people keeping a bit of the mystery there, and trying to project something a little bit more confident than you are, can be quite useful. And I think particularly for women and you know, non-binary people, or anyone who isn't kind of just, I guess, cis male, there's a thing about like when you're interviewing and stuff, or looking at a job ad, where men are traditionally more likely to apply for things that they're not qualified for, and they often get those jobs. It's just kind of like a researchy thingy. And it's a thing we researched, and that was the outcome. So I think just do the same thing, play by the same rules. If you see a job and you don't think you are cut out for it, apply for it anyway. You know, there might be something in your application that the person sees, and there's actually very little in the way of like negative consequences that can have. And that does go for everyone. Like, you know, if you are a cis man and you're not particularly confident, you know, there's going to be other people out there who are. So apply for it anyway. Give yourself a chance. and then let someone else do the work of deciding whether or not you can do that. I don't know if I have any other tips. I can't really remember what the question was, sorry.
I was just about to ask you actually if you have any perhaps don'ts that you could sort of share with us.
Don't go to a job interview without having played the game. Just don't. Like, you know, if the game is there, play the game. There's nothing that's going to make us say no faster. And it's not because we want you to flatter us in the interview. It's just because, like, that is the minimum level of showing that you're interested. And a lot of a job interview is trying to work out how interested you are and how much of a shit you give. So, like, if you've researched the company and you've played their game, or you've played like some of their competitors' games, all those things are things that make you seem more interested. And the same with like design tests or writing tests. Even if you think, oh, I'm not sure how good at this I'm actually going to be, the more effort you put in really shows. And for me, at least as an interviewer, that really goes a long way. Like, I'm much more willing to give someone the time of day and to talk to them about the work they've done if I can see that they've put in a lot of care and work into that. So I guess, like, you know, if you have an opportunity, don't just like let it slip away by kind of phoning it in. Those things are, like, I guess, not written in stone anywhere that you have to do them, but you do have to do them. You should do them. And what else? What are my other don'ts? I think just remembering, you know, because it's a very digital workplace, and there's a transition from being a student into being a professional or being someone who's trying to work with industry, like companies, or work independently and have sort of a persona for themselves online. Just like, don't get too caught up in like some of the online bullshit that happens, and remember that people will be able to see who you were when you were in uni, on like your Twitter account or your Reddit account or whatever. Like, I'm not saying that to you know, put the fear into anyone, but just like have a little bit of decorum, I guess, on your social media accounts if they're going to be linked back to you when you're applying for jobs. Like, don't be a total dickhead to people, and it will come around in a positive way. And what else? Oh, you don't have to wear a suit if you're going to a job interview in games. I'm sure you know this already, but we will laugh at you if you turn up in a suit. Like, not in a mean-spirited way, but just like, it's not, you don't have to. And don't do any internships for free, just because that means, like, it's not about the money at that point. It just means they disrespect you and they're not going to be very good to you. So make sure that you don't undersell yourself or undervalue yourself, because you're probably at that point working with quite predatory people. So yeah, don't go down that route.
Excellent. We actually had a question from the audience, from Ariel Can. How do you see the relationship between different kinds of physical games, such as tabletop games and digital gaming, in terms of narrative storytelling?
That's really interesting. I guess, do you mean in terms of like the relationship they have between each other, as like you might have a story across those different platforms, or more in terms of like the comparisons between them? Because I can answer on both, but I just wanted to like clarify before I start rambling.
We've got plenty of time, so you can answer both.
Okay, so the relationship that they have to each other is a bit of a flawed one, I guess, like, because the way you tell a story in a tabletop setting versus in a digital setting, and you try and switch that over, is always going to be a disappointing experience if you're catering to someone who's played the other version. Like, I have been playing a bit of Baldur's Gate 3, and it's a really great game, and I will keep playing it, but it's not Dungeons and Dragons. Like, it's not tabletop D&D. And so there's something a bit frustrating about that. And then on the flip side, I have a friend who ran a D&D campaign that was an adaptation of Genshin Impact. So it's not Genshin Impact, you know, like a big part of the game there is like you know, flashy, like button mashy stuff that you just kind of don't get in a tabletop equivalent. So that there are certainly, I would say it's almost always better to be inspired by the other games rather than to try and do a like for like copy. I think there's something really interesting about cross-platform storytelling though. So like storytelling that could be both, you know, one part of the story is told in a book, one part is told over like mobile game, one part is told over tabletop game, and another over like a computer or a console game. There's really not very many projects that do that kind of thing, but it's an interesting place to look at in an experimental point of view. Like, I think Fallen London briefly had like a tabletop thing going on that was quite interesting. It was nice because the thing they were working on had more of a sort of capturing the atmosphere kind of vibe rather than sort of trying to recreate how that game works, because it just wouldn't work as a tabletop game. Or maybe it would work, but it wouldn't be that interesting. Like it's just not a very good straight translation, because the thing that is special about it is kind of like lost, I guess, at that point. Because, for instance, with Fallen London, part of what's special about that is the way that it kind of slots into your day. It's got really good appointment mechanics, and with tabletop games you don't have appointment mechanics, like, or if you did, it would be really weird. So you kind of lose something there that I guess is through part of the game design side of it, or the structure of the actual media. And then in terms of like comparing them to each other, I would say I learned a lot from working on tabletop games and creating things as like a designer, a game designer. Like I learned a lot about how those things can be made, and that was able to sort of be carried over into digital. And it's less expensive to make those mistakes with tabletop than it is with digital, because you can just sort of, you know, screw up a piece of paper and move on to the next thing. And the other thing, I guess, was with my storytelling, I realized that there's this really important thing about how the player perceives something that you've written. And in a tabletop setting where you're constantly interacting with your audience, you realize that one person's sort of reading of a scene might be totally different to the other person's. And there's this huge disparity of, like, you know, one person thinks that like something totally different just happened to someone else. And that can be really interesting to play around with, but it's something that you also have to be very aware of when you're writing as someone who isn't seeing their players or isn't seeing their reader. So yeah, I think just being a bit more mindful of like the different versions of things that people can read, and trying to find ways to sort of both play around with that and also just like not get burned by it, and having scenes that like you expect to read is in like a really exciting way and actually is really confusing to the player or the reader. Yeah, I hope that answered your question. Yeah.
Excellent. We've got another question from Molly, and she says, how important is it to consider monetization when narrative games and stories for mobile, when writing, narrative and stories for mobile games? Is it something you have to integrate into your narrative design, designing narrative for mobile as opposed to PC?
Yeah, so mobile games have a different relationship with monetization than you know, other types of game. Particularly the free-to-play model has a different relationship, and a lot of that is looking at something called the lifetime value of a player. So you have like a certain amount of players who will never monetize, and a certain amount of players who will monetize. It's usually a lot smaller than the ones who won't. And it might be that the people who do monetize will maybe spend in their entire interaction with the game something like $20, and then you have to like take that number, divide it amongst all the players, and then like make it worthwhile to make that game. And there is a lot of work and a lot of like salaries that need to be paid that go into making a mobile game. And so there's like this kind of relationship that you have to handle with making sure that the things that you're offering for money in the game aren't detracting from the free-to-play experience. So, you know, free-to-play previously had like quite a bad rap, and I think it still does with some games for being like quite aggressive and squeezing the player or being misleading in some way. But I think there are a lot of games now that do that better. There's still a lot of games that do it badly though. So I think Love and Pies is in the category where we do it quite well. You know, our game is quite slow for people who play it for free, and it takes a bit longer, but that's kind of the only way in which you get penalized for not spending money. You just have to wait longer for the thing that you're getting for free. And if you want to play faster, then you have to spend. So I think that's like one of the healthiest ways to do monetization. I like the story and the monetization not to particularly interact. The only way I don't mind it interacting is like kind of in a DLC type way, where it's like, if you spend money, then you'll get this additional content. I think that's quite a, what's the word, like a kind of honest way of doing a paid story thing. But again, I think that's important to not have the story in the paid content be essential. It should be an additional thing. It should be a nice extra, not something you need to know to be able to comprehend the free story. Otherwise, it's not a free-to-play game. It's a sham. So yeah, that's my take on that with free-to-play games and in the mobile market. But there's some really interesting examples of sort of ethical ways to involve narrative in the monetization and storytelling, and less scrupulous ways to do it. So ones to look at as really interesting examples are, there's a game called Mystic Messenger, that if you like dating sims at all, trust me, you'll probably enjoy it. It's a really good game. And they have, you basically have like an energy system. So you only have so much energy to get through different conversations and stuff. But you also have to wait for your boyfriends or your love interests to message you. And it's done in real time. So some of those characters are only awake in the middle of the night, and they will only message you in the middle of the night. And if you miss their message, you don't get to talk to them. So you can pay to go back and to talk to them, which kind of plays on, I guess, your interest in like an individual character, but it's done in such an organic way. It doesn't feel particularly aggressive. And you can also pay to unlock new content and stuff. And one of the reasons I like this game so much is because it has a very, I think, upfront sort of season pass type thing, where you can pay like something like 20 quid and just have the game and play everything, which is what I did. I loved that game. And I think I spent a lot of money on other stuff as well before I bought that. So it can monetize really well when there's like a good marriage between the narrative and the monetization, and the player doesn't feel like they're getting scammed. Like, I think it's always about making sure you feel like you have value for money. And with story, you can actually get really great stories for free in so many places. Like, there's so much like really good manga online that you can get, whether it should be free or not, like that is online, it is available online. And the same with webtoons and films and TV shows, and even like really high quality fan fiction or really high quality writing that's available online. So there's so many different places you can go to get your stories if the games aren't actually having the right balance between being like sort of appetizing and interesting and also good value for money. So I think there's like a fine line to be tread there. Another really interesting one to look at is, I think it's called the Arcana or something like that. It's like a dating story game thing that's really interesting. It's got really good queer representation, really interesting characters that are quite likable. And one of the things I like is that it tends to make sense to have to pay for the options. So they sometimes have options for the story that are locked by money. But it tends to be something where it's like, oh, I need this thing that I don't have. And so it sort of makes a bit of sense to pay for that. And the other thing they do is that it tends not to ruin the game or ruin the story if you don't pay for things. It's not like you only get the bad ending if you aren't paying. And I think it's also interesting to bear in mind, both as a player and as a writer, that when you are passing a pay point in the story, and after this point, the player will not have monetized potentially. So say that you offer me in this dating story to kiss the character I like or not, and if I kiss them, I have to pay £2 or something like that. Then, you know, if I don't do that, you still want to get money out of me afterwards. So you have to offer me more opportunities to have a romantic interaction with that character, or to do something that makes it a fun or a good ending. So, you know, these things aren't as simple as if you pay, you win here, or you lose. Like, there's usually more layers to it than that. But if you want to see a really bad example, games like Episodes and things like that have some crackers, like for just really shady monetization in their stories. It'll usually be things like that there's a Mean Girls adaptation, or Mean Girls franchise story that they tell, where you have to either wear like this really ugly dress to the school prom, or you can pay to wear a nice dress. And if you don't wear the nice dress, you get made fun of in the story. So it's just like teaching really bad messages to like the demographic, because demographic is teenagers and younger people. And so you're sort of giving this really shitty message, but also you're just kind of making the player feel bad. And it doesn't make sense from like a design perspective, because you'll have people stop playing because they don't want to be made to feel bad about not spending money in these like really kind of arbitrary ways. And they also squeeze it to try and make you spend in every single big choice they have. And at that point, you just get tired of it. It's like, oh, I don't want to read this story anymore. Like, it's not that good. It's not worth this. So yeah, that's I guess and the start of an answer to your question, but it's a really interesting question, Molly. It could it has many layers to it, I think.
And we have also a question from Francesco. He says, let's say the game company choose to apply as a writer is new and they have not published a game yet. How do you suggest to approach that sort of?
Well, that's actually what happened to me with Trailmix. So Love and Pies hadn't been announced at that point. It was top secret, and I didn't play the game before I joined the company, which was a sort of big gamble on my part, because I didn't know if I would like the game. And so there tends to be a discussion there about, you know, you have to look at what you think they're trying to make. Look at their website and the sort of games they're talking about and the sort of projects they're talking about. Look at the sort of employment history of the founders, like what have they done, what have they interacted with. You know, you can look at their portfolio and see like, oh, one of the co-founders worked on this game that I like. I'll talk about that in the interview because I know that they'll know about that game. So a little bit of like stalking and researching is quite useful in that context. And sort of playing what you think the competitor games might be. Like if you know that someone you're applying to is making like a match 3 story game, go and play successful match 3 story games so that you can talk about them in an informed way in your interview. Or if you know, if it's a sports game, go play other sports games. Whatever it is that you think they're trying to make, try and look at who their key competitors are going to be, and just give yourself like a Cliff Notes version of that part of the industry, and you'll be in a really good place.
We also have a question from Sam. He asks, if a writing team is small, any tips on how to go about writing authentic, inclusive story if you team doesn't happen to belong to diverse groups? Is it better to at least try than not to, even if everyone happens to be cis, white, hetero, etc.?
Yeah, definitely it's better to try than to not do it at all. Like, I don't think that it's always inauthentic to write a story about something that's not your lived experience. But I think that's a part where you have to become good at listening, and you have to be very open to feedback and to try and seek it out. So there's this sort of job title, I guess, that has come around of being a sensitivity reader, which I don't know, it feels like quite a new job title, but maybe it's been around longer. But if you're not part of a group and you're writing a story, you can hire a sensitivity reader, usually on like freelance rates, to have them look at your work and to see if it is authentic, or if they have concerns, if there's anything that they think is going to be offensive about it, or misrepresentative. And I think that's something that's, if you can do that, I know not all projects can afford to do that, but if you can, it's a really important thing to do. I wouldn't suggest trying to ask someone to do that for free, because I think that's quite exploitative. But what you can do is maybe try and ask someone if they would do it for credit, or if they would do it in exchange for being able to sort of like get a free version of the project or something like that. At the end of the day, most people are quite excited to be involved. Like if you're reaching out to another creative, they're probably going to want to work on a cool project. But it's about being very respectful of, you're asking that person to do work for you, and you shouldn't really be asking them to do it for free if you're in a position to not do that. So that's kind of one thing I would suggest, but also researching, trying to put yourself into the shoes of the person and understand what those experiences are, and maybe even doing some sort of player-based research, stuff like that. There's lots of different routes you can go down, but I think the main thing is to just listen and to be open to the fact that you might not know everything, you might not know as much as you think you do about the experiences of those people. I think there's like a real active thing that has to be done to sort of be listening and to be open to experiences and situations not being what you expect them to be, and to be ready to sort of realize that your understanding of stuff might be completely different to this person's. So that's what I would suggest.
We also have a question from Richard Coys. I hope I pronounced it properly. I'm sorry if I haven't. Is the narrative dissonance harmony something you came to face before? And if yes, how do you deal with this blockage when writing for a game?
This is making me like really draw on my degree now to remember all these terms. I think I have come across it before, I think there's sometimes you just get mechanics that don't feel right with the story, or that are at odds with them. And I think particularly, that chat we were kind of having about monetization is where that comes up for me a lot in the story related stuff. It feels so wrong to make someone pay for story, but it also feels really bad to not pay your employees. So there's like kind of a balancing act that has to be done there. I think that it sometimes means you have to make less than graceful game mechanics that cause you to maybe to spend money, or less than graceful game mechanics to tell the story. One of the times that I sort of had to grapple a bit with ludonarrative dissonance was Love and Pies is a merge game now, but when I started working on it, it was a match 3. It wasn't a match 3, it was like a match and merge game. It was like this completely new genre that we had tried to make, or it was like a mishmash of genres. And it went through being 4 different versions of the core game when I worked on it, because we were struggling to get it to test well with players. The story was testing really well and the art was testing really well, but the game itself wasn't, it didn't have that like thing where you keep going back for more. It was missing something. So we ended up taking the story we've written for this like match and merge game and plonking it on top of a merger and hoping for the best, because we had made this game in about 2 months. The core we had made in 2 months, and we were pushing to release in like a 6-week window. where we were like, we're just going to get this out and test it, and then we'll go back and fix the story. And that's the only time I've actually had like a row with my boss. And I was very sulky about it. I was like, oh, you're the boss then, so we'll do it your way. Which is another don't I would recommend, is like, maybe don't get don't yell when you're talking to your boss, if you can help it. So that was for me something that felt like ludo narrative dissonance. But actually, like, in our player feedback, nobody really cared. It was actually fine for them. It was just, I think, from a narrative design perspective, it was something where you can sort of see all the little inconsistencies, all the friction and stuff that shouldn't be there. But we did then have a polished pass where I was eventually allowed to go back in and to edit the story to make it fit better with this new game, and to give it a bit of a resizing and to tailor it better, I guess. And it's one of those things that's really hard to prove in data, whether or not that mattered to players ever, but I think it probably did improve the player experience. It's just really hard to prove that. And I think part of design, like the design half of the narrative design role, is about sometimes going with your gut and making decisions that can't really be proved in data, but can sort of be proven through just your intuition, as an artist or as a creator, to be what works. So yeah, that was one of my experiences.
I think we might be slowly running out of time. So I just asked the last question. It was from Tarek Clavier. How has COVID changed the landscape of the narrative writing for games, and how can we adapt?
So I think there's a lot more remote roles now, which is probably a good thing, right? It makes it easier and more accessible to get into the industry. I think that there's, you get really deep with this question, because I think COVID has caused people to sort of reassess themselves and the world and the people around them, in a lot of sort of broad strokes. We've had to sort of take some time out and think about what we want from life and who we are. And so I think that the stories that we tell are maybe a bit more empathetic, at least in my experience. I'm more interested in telling stories that are going to emotionally move people, and also stories that are more about relaxation and unwinding. So things like Animal Crossing, we suddenly see the benefit for games like that, where self-care and games that can diffuse our mental health actually can be life-saving or really essential. I've no doubt that for people in the world, Animal Crossing saved their lives because of the time at which it came out, and the comfort and benefit and nourishment that some people got from that. And that's the type of storytelling that I think maybe wouldn't have had, it wouldn't have been given a lot of credit maybe in the narrative community, because it is like very hands-off storytelling, very like cutesy, wholesome. It doesn't have the conflict peaks that you would expect in a story, but actually, maybe there is a lot of value in that. Maybe there's more we have to learn there. So I think, on a personal level, it's changed for me the sorts of stories I want to tell and the value I would place on different types of storytelling. The sort of the way that I see sort of the barriers to the industry, like, being able to work with someone in the US, or I now work with a co-worker in New Zealand, as she moved over the course of COVID. And that is much more possible now with the strides we've made in remote working. So yeah, I guess like it's made some sort of practical changes, but also it's made some changes in how I think about stuff as well, and probably for other people as well.
I think that also sort of ties in with the question that Nadia asked, that I was worried I wouldn't be able to read out, Nadia Andrade. So I'm really sorry, but I think it sort of answers working, the game studios in the UK hire people from the US, and whether you collaborate with them, sorry. So I think
yes,
touched on that as well.
Yeah, so the answer to this is actually really boring. I'm sorry, Nadia, but there's it's mostly tax rules that stop that from happening. So it usually can happen at bigger companies if they've got the money to sort of figure out the tax stuff. At Trailmix, we're quite a small company, and so we can hire people from anywhere in the world as long as we can pay them the same way. So at the moment, that means we can have people working in Europe, and we have a contractor in New Zealand, a contractor in Australia. And I think in those territories, it's fine. In the US, there's a slight problem with just how it gets taxed. I don't know anything about it. I'm just there for the pretty stories, to be honest, rather than understanding tax stuff. But apparently there's some sort of problem with it. And it also often happens the other way around, where you know, even if you are working in like a American time zone, you know, you're happy to be up in the middle of the night, a lot of US companies can't hire you because of the way that they need to, I think, tax or file their employees. I'm sorry, I don't know much about it, but I think that is the reason that some companies just flat out won't do it. But I think as the risk and benefit, or the cost benefit, becomes higher for you as an employee, you know, as you have more that you can individually bring to the table, there's more companies that will be willing to go to the hassle of making that work. Like, you know, they can, through money, time, and effort, make you an employee, even if you're based in the UK and working in the US, or vice versa. So yeah, I think it might not be something that's always possible at the beginning of your career, but it can become more possible as you sort of gain more experience and develop more as a writer. I think it's like just practicalities rather than any sort of unwillingness for any other reason. We do have a lot of people from the US who have moved to Europe that are working for Trailmix now. So they didn't move because of us, but they had already moved. So yeah, we have a couple of Americans.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much.
Welcome.
It's been wonderful. It's been wonderful talking to you about this. And I wish we could just carry on, you know, for the rest of the evening, really. I hope that everyone found it valuable. I'm sure everyone has. I certainly did. And yeah, thank you so much for being here today with us, Alice.
Oh, you're welcome. It's been really fun. If anyone has any questions that didn't get answered, or anything to think of later, I'm really happy to chat. I don't remember what my Twitter handle is, but you'll probably find it if you search for my name. And you can send me questions on there, or you can ask Penda or Olga to pass questions on to me. I'm really happy to talk more. And if anyone specifically really wants to get into writing, you know, like Olga said, I have mentored people before. I'm not the most reliable in terms of timing and punctuality as a mentor, as I'm quite busy at the moment, but I am happy to chat if people want to have sort of informal mentoring at any point. I'm happy to do that. So yeah, it was lovely to meet you all, and thank you for listening. It's been great. Have a good evening.